It won't be blue skies everywhere, but most places will see some good spells of sunshine and temperatures responding, finally getting back up to 20 degrees, maybe 21 across some parts of the south. Cooler feel with the patchy rain across the northwest that persists during Thursday evening. If anything, it gets a bit heavier as weather fronts start to push in during Thursday night and Friday, and these weather fronts will bring some rain across the country on Friday. But after that, high pressure moves back in, and that should bring most of us a fine, bright weekend. Bye for now.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. It's the last day of campaigning for the local elections. Chair of the Women and Equalities Committee, Caroline Noakes MP, will join us to discuss the culture in Westminster and the HRT shortage. Plus, we have a fantasy Prime Minister's Question Time with two former MPs. First, it is your news with Rosie. Good afternoon, it's 12 o'clock. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The European Union will stop importing Russian oil and refined products as part of new sanctions against Russia. The European Commission President-Chief Ursula von der Leyen says crude oil supplies will be phased out in 6 months and refined products will be phased out by the end of the year. Well, von der Leyen is warning it won't be easy, but it must be done.
Putin must pay a price, a high price, for his brutal aggression. Thus, the future of our European Union is also written in Ukraine. This sends another important signal to all perpetrators of the Kremlin. We know who you are. We will hold you accountable. You're not getting away with this.
Russia's defence minister has told Russian media the Ukrainian fighters in Mariupol's steel plants are now blockaded. The governor of Ukraine's Donetsk region said another convoy of buses left Mariupol in the evacuation operation this morning. They're now heading to the Ukrainian-controlled city of Zaporizhzhia. President Zelensky has confirmed over 150 people were evacuated from the steel plant yesterday.
Currently, Russian troops are not adhering to the agreements. They continue massive strikes on Azovstal. They are trying to mount an assault on the facility. But I have been told many times that we will not succeed in rescuing a single person, that this is impossible. And today, 156 people are in Zaporizhia. This is not a victory yet, but a result.
Sarah Everard's murderer, Wayne Couzens, and the killer of 6-year-old Arthur Labinho Hughes, Thomas Hughes, have appeared via video link at the Royal Courts of Justice. They are among 5 killers having their sentences reviewed today. Our London reporter Alice Porter has been at court.
The Attorney-General has referred 3 sentences to the Court of Appeal for being too low, including Emma Tustin, who murdered 6-year-old Arthur Labinho Hughes in Solihull. Now, Emma Tustin was given a life imprisonment with a minimum of 29 years, but Suella Braverman wants that to be upgraded to a whole life order. 2 sentences are also being examined to see if they were too high, including Wayne Couzens, who kidnapped, murdered and raped Sarah Everard. It's very unusual to have 5 cases reviewed in this way by multiple judges, and today is very much about what happens when judges hand out whole life orders and how they interpret sentencing guidelines.
German investigators have found new evidence against the prime suspect in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. A prosecutor told Portuguese television they're now sure convicted sex offender Christian Bruckner murdered her. That's something he denies. The 3-year-old vanished during a family holiday in Praia de Luz in 2007. The cost of our food shop went up 3.5% last month. The latest figures from the British Retail Consortium show food inflation is contributing to the cost of living crisis. Price increases on fresh ingredients slowed a little as supermarkets compete to keep the cost down of everyday essentials. Well, meanwhile, 7 in 10 first-time buyers are delaying plans to purchase a home. A survey by Nationwide Building Society has found many of those planning to buy in the next couple of years are now struggling to save for a deposit. Nearly half say they're cutting back on everyday spending. Complaints about university courses reached a record high last year. The Office for the Independent Adjudicator for Higher Education is blaming the pandemic and industrial action for poor learning experiences. Well, the regulator says the total payout awarded to students was over £1.3 million. Trade unions are warning cuts to rail funding will endanger passengers and increase the risk of serious train crashes. The TUC claims Network Rail plans to reduce its annual spending by £100 million, mainly by losing 2,500 maintenance jobs. The union believes safety-critical jobs will be cut. The Department of Transport, though, says safety will always be the main priority of Network Rail. London's new railway, the Elizabeth line, will open on May the 24th. The line will run from Reading in Berkshire to Shenfield in Essex and Abbey Wood in south-east London. It was originally meant to open in December of 2018, but was hit by construction delays and difficulties installing complex signalling systems. You're now up to date on GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to the briefing with Gloria.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing, it's the last day of campaigning before the local elections. We'll be live in Sunderland, Derbyshire and taking the temperature in Wales too. And after some dreadful behaviour by MPs, the chair of the Women and Equalities Committee, the Conservative MP Caroline Noakes, joins me to discuss the culture in the House of Commons and what needs to change. We're also talking HRT and abortion in America. And it's Wednesday, but there's no PMQs because Parliament isn't sitting, but never mind. We'll have a fantasy PMQs with former Labour MP Stephen Pound and former Conservative Cabinet Minister Stephen Dorrell. We'll be live outside the Courts of Justice where the sentences of Sarah Everard and Arthur Labinho Hughes' killers are being reviewed. Today is the last day of campaigning before the local elections. Will voters focus on local issues or take the chance to make their views on the cost of living, crisis and Partygate known? GB News political editor Darren McCaffrey joins us from Sunderland. Darren, tell us why you're in Sunderland.
Well, you might not think it in many ways, Gloria, but Sunderland's become a bit of a battleground for the Labour Party. 25 of the 75 seats are up for grabs tomorrow. Labour are the largest party here. They remain in control. However, given the losses they experienced in 2017 and 2019, they only need to lose half a dozen seats here and they would lose control of the council for the first time since its creation back in 1974. Now, is that likely? Well, it seems unlikely, but the Conservatives think they are in with a chance, and clearly that would be a significant blow to Keir Starmer. Why do I say that? Well, because, of course, Keir Starmer needs to prove that he can win in places like this, win back some old Labour voters who switched to the Conservatives if he is to show that he's got a path to victory in a couple of years' time in a general election. Really fascinating, though, isn't it? Of course, these conversations that take place about how much local issues really matter, bin collections, potholes, your council tax, bus services, for example, in how people vote in local elections, and how much that national narrative around the cost of living crisis or the Partygate and sleaze scandals will factor into people's votes. I think in the end, there is an attempt, at least by the Conservatives, to disassociate the two and say, please do vote in local matters. And the reason I say that is the Conservatives in Hartlepool, so just down the road from here, have issued a leaflet in which they're essentially pleading with voters not to punish them for what's happened at Westminster, but rather judge them on the local records.
And both political leaders, the main party leaders, are under pressure, Darren.
Yeah, I think they are, and for kind of quite similar reasons, if in very different circumstances. First of all, the government's going to get a kicking tomorrow. That should not be a surprise to anyone. It happens in all midterm elections. I think the big question for Boris Johnson is just how big the kicking is. Is it simply going to be a couple of hundred seats? That clearly would be quite sustainable. If it was substantially more than that, and there were suggestions at the weekend it could be up to 600 seats, which would be the largest defeat of a governing party, I think, since Blair in the mid-90s. Now, that clearly would get quite tricky for Boris Johnson. MPs again might start to question, well, if Boris Johnson's not going to win us elections, what is the point of the Prime Minister, given the fact that many of them, frankly, are not necessarily big fans of his. But if the damage is limited, I think it may well strengthen him going forward, even if there are more fixed penalty fines, for example. But there is pressure on Keir Starmer too, and I come back to this point, Gloria, that Keir Starmer needs to prove that he can win council seats, that as the main opposition party, an opposition party that wants to win, frankly, the next election, that's got the ability to win in different parts of the country, not just in London, but up here in Sunderland and indeed elsewhere. And if he fails to do that on quite a large level, I think again people will start to say, well, you know what, Labour's chances of winning the next election, which are already incredibly tough with an 80-seat Conservative majority, well, you'd have to say that that is looking less and less likely. So it is a crucial day for both leaders and, of course, for the smaller parties. And those elections taking place in England, but also council elections for the whole of Wales and for Scotland too. And, crucially, there'll be elections in Northern Ireland for the Stormont Assembly. They could be very, very critical, and we'll have full coverage of them. The results will probably be a little bit later, Friday into the weekend, could really determine the UK's relationship with the EU going forwards.
Darren McCaffrey, brilliant summary. Thank you. Amber Valley in Derbyshire used to be a marginal constituency, now is a big Conservative majority. The council is currently under Conservative control, but Labour will be hoping to make gains there. Our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, joins us live from Belper in Derbyshire on Amber Valley's electoral outlook. Hi, Will.
Good morning, good afternoon in fact, just slightly past 12 o'clock, isn't it? Of course, yes, Amber Valley, as you say, it's a population of around 130,000 people. It does have a tradition of mining in the largest borough of this part of Derbyshire, but traditionally it has always voted for Conservative for a long time, but that doesn't mean that Labour never get into power. Over 3 or 4 different occasions the Labour Party has held power here, but right now, as you say, it is a Conservative majority of 25 seats that they have. Labour 14, Greens have 1 seat and then another seat as well is in there as well. So a lot of people are going to be looking very closely at how the power is divided as they go to the election polls tomorrow. They'll also be looking at whether local issues are getting heard, but they'll also be thinking about, as Darren quite rightly said, what's been going on in the national picture, whether Boris Johnson and parties and fines, whether that really matters in this part of the country. So I've been out in Belper yesterday speaking to people about what really matters to them and if it's a national election in all but name instead being called a local election.
I've already done postal vote, and I voted Green for this because they do a lot in Duffield Green. They've done a lot of things, that are suitable for older people.
We think that probably Labour's the only people that just generally are the big people to go against the Tories. But Green is definitely something that we think is more the way to go. But it's whether generally we're always thinking, do we tactically vote or do we vote with what we really believe?
I still think, despite all the stories that's been going on about Boris and everything, I still think he's done an amazing job for us. He's had to deal with everything that's gone off through COVID and then the Ukraine war and everything, and I think he's been there for us all the way through and through. Yes, he's made mistakes, but I think any party in that position would have made mistakes. So, and as far as local councils go, again, I don't see any issues with it. I'm happy with the decisions they made for us.
I think I'm going to go for the Green Party this time. Mainly because I've had enough of Labour and the Conservatives. I think they just all chat rubbish, don't they? I've had enough of them.
The way I see it, even if Labour were in charge, I don't know if they would have done any better than the Conservatives anyway.
No, I'm not planning on voting at all. I don't think it really matters at this minute in time who we vote for, who's in power. We're still going to be in the same position either way.
Because I've been a lifelong Conservative voter. In fact, I even stood for to be the MP of an area not so far around here. Came second, I didn't get it, but I think they've completely lost the plot, to be honest. Absolutely lost the plot. So they won't be getting my vote this time around.
I'm trying to vote the best vote for Belper, but you know what? I also want to give the major parties a good spanking. I like generally the Green ideas, but I don't like the woke aspect of the Green Party. In some ways, it seems to me the woke side of the Labour Party under a new name. I like the Labour Party's social policies, but I don't like their wokeness. I like the Tory Party's anti-wokeness, if you like.
If something big is happening locally, then you've got a chance to do something about it. But if you look at Amber Valley and it's, Conservative, Labour, etc. It doesn't matter who's in, we're more or less doing the same thing.
Now, it's worth reminding you that not every council area in England is voting. Amber Valley is one of those areas where they vote based on a third of their councillors per year. So they have a year, and then 1 year off when there are other county-council elections and that sort of thing. It's worth reminding you that all of the candidates that are standing in local elections here are available on the Amber Valley Borough Council website, and polls do open here and everywhere else from 7 a.m, closing at 10 p.m. tomorrow.
Will, thank you so much for giving us the views of voters in Belper in Amber Valley. Thank you. In Wales, Monmouthshire was the only council that was won outright by the Conservatives at the last election 5 years ago. Our national reporter Bradley Harris has been to Monmouth to see if people there still think the same way.
It was 5 years ago when the Conservatives took majority control of Monmouthshire. Now they're promising to tackle bread and butter issues, such as fixing streetlights, pavements and putting potholes right as part of their latest local election campaign. But are these the issues voters here in Monmouthshire want to prioritise?
Plan of infrastructure for parking, so people can park easier, for more tourism for buses to come into town, help support the shops, local businesses, and stop them from closing down, really, because they're not getting the customers into the shops.
I'm thinking more of the economy and the way people are struggling with household bills at the moment, but also the health system. The health system is creaking after COVID particularly, so we need more money pushed into certainly health and the economy generally to help people with things like food banks and so on.
Potholes, the Wye Bridge is atrocious. It's like a third world country road. Parking in the town isn't great anymore because there's no room, and taking your kids to school or school times is just chaos, absolute chaos.
Whatever the issues are, can voters here separate local party promises with the much bigger political stories across the UK? Boris Johnson's handling of the cost of living crisis, the war in Ukraine and the continuing developments over Westminster parties held during COVID restrictions could be crucial as we step closer to May the 5th. Kate Watts runs a cafe in Monmouth. She's noticed her high street change over many years and wants to see consistency from the council.
Thanks, bye. I think there's lots of things that have been happening that, could change your mind, but for me personally, no. I think it's about consistency, making sure we've got the same leader at this time. I don't think we should be changing drastically. Obviously, things like Ukraine, cost of living is really important. It's been really, really difficult over the past 5 years, so any government that was in power really would have had a difficult time. And I think it's been handled as best as it really could. Who knows, if it would have been different with somebody else in power. So for me, yeah, I'm quite happy with how it's been handled.
Across Mono Bridge, others are looking for a change from a Tory majority.
Or if they got back in Monmouth, I think that would be a real retrograde step. It would be just more of the same, of the same, of the same. Not any positive aspects to them, really.
As they look to build on the gains they made 5 years ago, the Welsh Conservatives are well aware that many voters will be basing their decision on wider issues, including lockdown parties in Downing Street and the cost of living crisis. We'll get a better idea of how true that is at the polls tomorrow. Bradley Harris, GB News, Monmouthshire.
Next, Caroline Noakes MP. She's chair of the Women and Equalities Committee. She joins me next. We'll talk about the culture in Westminster, HRT shortages and possible change in the law on abortion in the United States after the break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity. That's the question? That's two questions, actually. That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It was a pretty dismal week in Westminster last week. Lots of allegations about the sort of culture that happens in our Parliament and what needs to be done to change it. Joining me now is somebody who's been quite vocal on this, Caroline Noakes MP. She is chair of the Women Equalities Committee and the Conservative MP for Romsey and Southampton North. I'm delighted that you're on the show, Caroline. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Gloria, how are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. You have said you have been pretty outspoken on recent events. I'm interested in lots of things that you've had to say. Politics attracts a particular kind of macho, willy-waving man, you said. Just tell us a bit more about what you meant by that.
Did I say that? That was quite rude of me, wasn't it? Look, I think anybody in politics is quite assertive, they're quite outspoken, they hold strong views. What we see in Westminster, though, and what I've witnessed over the course of the last 12 years since I've been an MP, is what I would describe as the deliberate belittling and demeaning of women MPs, a culture which fosters a lack of respect. You know, I can remember being told when I was a very new minister that I'd only been given that job because of certain body parts that I had. And that was what people were saying to my face. Who knows what they were saying behind my back? And for me, we have to get away from this sort of male-dominated culture. I desperately want us to get to a position where we see more women in Parliament. I'd love it to be 50-50, but it's taking too long to get there. And in the meantime, we're still having to contend with some really outdated and frankly unpleasant attitudes.
That was an extraordinary example that you just gave me about when you were appointed as a government minister, what one of your colleagues, I'm assuming, said to you. Is that an isolated example of your own experience of outright sexism and misogyny?
No, it's not isolated. It's not isolated at all. And that's the challenge. And every single week, probably, there'll be some sort of microaggression. And I don't mean every week I'm the victim of a direct insult or some sort of assault. Of course I'm not. But there will be small comments, little bits and pieces here and there that you just pick up and you think, goodness me, nobody says that about a man. Every time a male politician goes on the media, nobody comments on what their hair looks like or what they're wearing. But pretty much every time a female politician does, that's what we face. And the thing that I always comment on is every time I do a media appearance, the first email into my inbox will be absolutely about how I looked, usually to call me fat, rather than anything that I've said.
Goodness me. I guess perhaps it's because women are a minority in Westminster that you might make an argument that because we're unusual creatures in that place, I think we're about a third, that people go, oh, you know, look at her hair or make other comments. Now, you said that you'd like to see a 50-50 Parliament. Of course, I was a Labour MP. Labour wanted to change things. The only way they could get there was through women-only shortlists. Is it time for the Conservative Party to recognise that there's only one vehicle to get that 50-50 thing?
Well, look, if you'd asked me 12 years ago, in fact, many people did I support women-only shortlists, I'd have said no. And I would have given you the normal standard mantra about MPs or candidates should be selected on merit. No, of course they should. We want the best people to stand for election. But we don't want women to be excluded either consciously or subconsciously. So I'm arguing that you need to have much better forms of recruitment and selection. We know that there are some great leading companies in the UK that have recognised the language that they use in recruitment puts off women. So guess what they did? They changed the language. I know that the processes that we go through in selecting our candidates to stand for election, in many instances, it's like asking a marathon runner to do the shot put. It's completely inappropriate and unrealistic for what you'll be expected to do and the skills that you'll need as a member of Parliament. You and I would recognise that every single week we hold constituency surgeries where people come to you with their problems. And one of the biggest skills that you need is empathy, an ability to understand people's situation, to take on board the information they're giving you quickly, and yet you will still be judged by the performance standing for selection that you have to give a speech in front of a large audience. And to be frank, that's not the bread and butter of the job. I think there's a really interesting and important debate to be had within the Conservative Party around women-only shortlists, around whether you reserve some seats for women, whether you have a priority system when there are retirement seats. We all recognise those safe seats when long-standing members of Parliament stand down. Maybe we need to be prioritising them for women. And the stark reality is that your average female member of Parliament will serve one full parliamentary term less than her male counterpart. Why is that? Is that because we end up in the marginal seats? Is it because, to be quite frank, we go through 10 years or so of low-level, insidious misogyny at every turn and go, you know what, I've had enough.
Very, very interesting. I want to talk to you about the HRT, the serious national shortage in HRT that's happening at the moment. And you said last week that you were due to run out of your own supply on Tuesday of this week. Today is Wednesday. Have you sourced any?
So actually it was Tuesday last week that I ran out.
Forgive me.
And I'm always completely candid about this, and this is not the medical advice. Carolyn Harris, Labour MP for Swansea East, an absolute goddess in my book, gave me a bottle of Estrogel. And I have, on Friday of last week, I managed to source some Estrogel. So I have a bottle that I can return to her when we go back for the state opening next Tuesday. So look, that's what I did. What we've also seen is women going online and online pharmacies charging now. I've heard prices as much as £80 for a bottle of Estrogel on a private prescription. That's simply unsustainable for most women. I think it looks like supplies are slightly improving, and I really, really welcome the appointment of Madeleine McTurnan to chair this HRT task force, but we need action. It's no good to have a task force in place and look for solutions that may be months down the line. We need there to be some of the most popular medicines need to be available really in very short order, because every single week women are going to get their repeat prescription and being told, as I was 3 months ago, I was told, oh, we can't source Estrogel at the moment, so you'll have to change to Sandrina. Now, look, women on HRT go through a process of trial and error, really, to find out what suits them best. So, yeah, whilst there are alternatives available, many of us would have settled on the one that works for us. And to be told, well, you'll have to have another one, is just unacceptable. So we need to see this task force up, running and delivering results for women of a certain age right now.
And final thought from you on the leak from the US Supreme Court suggesting the nationwide right to abortion in America could be overturned, so it would be a state-by-state decision. Your reaction to that, Caroline?
Well, look, this was settled 50 years ago, or we thought settled 50 years ago, and I think this is really bad news for women in the United States. We've already seen, I think it's the governor of Oklahoma, make a comment that Oklahoma will be the most pro-life state in the entire country. I want women in the USA to have the rights to abortion, the rights over their own body, their own reproductive health that were established by Roe versus Wade. And I think this is a huge step backwards by the Supreme Court. And I would argue this is exactly what you get when you politicise the judiciary, and why we are so lucky in this country not to have that.
Really interesting to get your thoughts on all of those issues. Caroline Noakes, thank you for your time today. Now, Parliament isn't sitting, so there is no Prime Minister's Question Time. So instead, join us for Fantasy PMQs with former Labour MP Stephen Pound and former Conservative Cabinet Minister Stephen Dorrell, who tell us what topics they would be covering if they were still in the House of Commons. First, it's the news with Rosie.
Good afternoon. It is 12:30. I'm Rosie Wright, here to keep you up to date on GB News. The European Union will stop importing Russian oil and refined products as part of new sanctions against Russia. The European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, says crude oil supplies will be phased out in 6 months and refined products will be phased out by the end of the year. Russia's defence minister has told Russian media the Ukrainian fighters in Mariupol steel plant are now blockaded. The governor of Ukraine's Donetsk region said another convoy of buses left Mariupol in the evacuation operation this morning. Meanwhile, the city of Lviv's mayor says Russian missile strikes have left parts of the western city without water or electricity. A power station's been hit. Lviv is near the Polish border where Western arms supplies enter for Ukraine's military. In some other news now, Sarah Everard's murderer, Wayne Couzens, and the killer of the 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo Hughes, Thomas Hughes, have appeared via video link at the Royal Courts of Justice. They are among 5 killers having their sentences reviewed today. Trade unions are warning cuts to rail funding will endanger passengers and increase the risk of serious train crashes. The TUC believes Network Rail will cut safety-critical jobs as part of plans to reduce annual spending. The Department of Transport said that safety will always be the main priority of Network Rail. The Transport Secretary says the announcement of the opening of London's new railway, the Elizabeth Line, a day before local elections, is in breach of electoral rules. Grant Shapps has referred the case for investigation by the Electoral Commission. The new line will open on the 24th of May. You're up to date now on GB News. We're on your TV, online and DAB+ radio. Don't go anywhere. Gloria will be back shortly with the briefing.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, on Wednesdays, we usually get the Prime Minister taking questions from MPs in the House of Commons. But this week, they're not sitting. So we have fantasy Prime Minister's question time for you. And joining me is the fantastic panel, former Health Secretary Stephen Dorrell and former Minister for Northern Ireland for Labour, Stephen Pound. Welcome to you, gentlemen. Lovely to see you, Stephen.
Thank you.
I'll put the same question to Stephen in a second, but Steve, the two Stephens, right. Yeah. I want to give you a terrible thought. You are back on the green benches.
Oh, my Lord.
It is Prime Minister's question time. Yeah. You have a question to ask the Prime Minister. Imagine if all those things were true, what would you ask him today?
Well, Gerald Kaufman said to me when I first came into the House...
Veteran Labour MP.
Yeah. He said, there's only one question you can ask the Prime Minister, ask Tony. That's what he said. Would the Prime Minister care to remind us of his latest triumphs? And I didn't say, which is probably why it took me a long time to get an answer. But it's interesting. Some people, like Tony McWalter, asked Tony Blair, what is your political philosophy? And poor Tony lost it. But what a lot of... I mean, you're a serious politician, but what a lot of people do in the House is they ask a local... Now, for example, we've got the Hanwell Carnival on June the 18th. So I'd say, I'm sure the Prime Minister will be coming to the Hanwell Carnival, sponsored by Hanwell Square on June the 18th. May I welcome him then? Of course, I'd be delighted to visit my John's constituency. But every now and then you'd get a serious one, like Tam Daly would ask about the Chagos Islands or something, and it was really, really serious. So it kind of fluctuates, but it's also the mood of the House.
Yes. Because
sometimes they're in a sort of cheerful mood, but what used to happen quite often, they'd announce that somebody had died or somebody got cancer,
yes.
And straight away everybody, you could see them tearing up their questions.
Yes.
So if I was asking a question, I'd simply say the people of this country know the impact of the cost of living prices. The Prime Minister clearly does not. Would he like to correct that impression?
Very good. I'm giving you points for a short question because MPs are terrible at asking long questions too. Stephen Durrell, it's lovely to see you. I'm taking you back to the time when you are on the green benches. You have a question for the Prime Minister. What would it be?
Well, I think on today, of course, is the day before local election day. So all elected politicians would be, their minds are focused today on local election day tomorrow. So there'd be, as Stephen Pan just said, there'd be a lot of people who would be asking questions about the latest developments in their local authority area. And if I were still a Conservative, which I'm not, I would be seeking to draw attention to successes of Conservative local authorities. I would be seeking, Stephen Pan just said if he were a Labour MP, he'd be wanting to focus on the cost of living currently. If I were a Tory MP, what I'd be wanting to do is to divert attention away from the cost of living or divert attention away from Partygate. So I'd probably be drawing attention to the fact that Boris Johnson was invited to speak to the Ukrainian parliament yesterday, present him as a statesman, and I'd be looking for successes in local government to encourage people to turn out and vote for their Tory candidate in tomorrow's local elections.
I love the
If I were actually now wearing my current hat in the House of Commons, what I'd be doing as a Liberal Democrat would be similar to Stephen Pan, drawing attention to the cost of living crisis and the apparent the Prime Minister's commitment, or what he said yesterday, frankly, an admission that the government should be doing more to address the issues raised by the cost of living crisis.
It's really interesting to hear both of you talk about the techniques that are employed by MPs at particular times. Thank you both for your reflection of that. Stephen, I will stay with you so I don't have to swing round quite so quickly. The culture in Westminster has really been under the spotlight in recent weeks. I mean, some quite extraordinary tales. My question to both of you, but I will start with Stephen, because you have the benefit of perspective and historical perspective. So my question to both of you is really, has there always been bad behaviour in there? And actually, only now it's being called out, and so it's a good thing in some ways because it's now not acceptable and perhaps it always existed. Stephen?
Yes, I think that's entirely right. I actually think, shocking though it may be, that the culture has improved in truth in Westminster. I was first elected in 1979, and there were certainly things said and things done in Westminster in my early years in Parliament, which I genuinely believe are unlikely to happen now. So I think it's Westminster, the culture has been changing, albeit slowly. And the truth is the Westminster is behind the curve in keeping up with people's expectations about how members of Parliament should behave.
Very clear. What do you agree with Stephen?
I hate to say I agree with Stephen because it sounds too awful. It sounds a bit Liberal Democratish. But look, the reality is that the church, medicine, so many other the professions have had their awful scandals in them, and most of them are actually working their way out of it. We are, as Stephen says, behind the curve on this one. I think the problem with Parliament is that there's a sense of entitlement. I mean, if you go to party conference, half the people there can't believe they're not MPs, and the other half can't believe they are MPs. And when you actually get into the House, suddenly, from a fairly low base, I mean, obviously if you're Boris Johnson or something, it's a step down, but, for most of us, it's a step up. And you suddenly find yourself being deferred to. And that feeling of power and entitlement is very intoxicating, dangerously so. And there are also people who are sort of kind of accommodating to that. I think what's different now is women will not stand for that rubbish anymore. Over half the Parliamentary Labour Party are now women, and that is one of the most healthy developments in Parliament, certainly in my time. And so that they just will not stand for that sort of rubbish and nonsense anymore. But there were some shocking things. Stephen and I could probably trade anecdotes about some of the absolute rascals that used to exist in Parliament who got away with it. And some of them were, pretty unpleasant people. Nowadays, sunlight being the best disinfectant, we now have all this is in the open air. You can't even drink a gin and tonic on the tube without somebody photographing you and putting it on I Spy MP. And do you know, it's a confounded nuisance, but I think it's quite healthy.
It is. I always used to prefer the smoking room because only MPs were allowed in there if I wanted like more than a couple of drinks.
Well, the smoking room in my day was always called Hernando's Hideaway.
By the way, you can't, for viewers, you can't smoke in there.
Yeah, no, you never could. You could play chess, though. Yeah, though, mind you, David Cameron used to have his own humidor in there. He and Ed Vase used to come in there, and they had a humidor of Marlborough Reds, and Hernando would bring it up and open it. And this was so Etonian and so also laid-back Cameroonian.
You both raised the cost of living earlier. Stick with you, Stephen. The windfall tax, which has been proposed, obviously it's a Labour proposal, but Rishi Sunak said no, but then indicated last week that maybe he would say yes, but the Prime Minister yesterday said no, definitely not. Do you think actually we'll end up with it?
It's almost irresistible. I mean, when you've got, the chief executive of BP said, we've never had it so good, we are swimming, loads and loads, we're in the money. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to say that, the old, heat, do you heat or do you eat, actually is a reality. Certainly in my former constituency and certainly in your former constituency, there are people who are on their uppers. And then when you've got people swanning around the city, saying it's raining £50 notes, of course you're going to do that. But it actually works. And in many ways, by stimulating demand, by putting money, not just fructifying in the pockets of the people, but being used as an agency of purchasing, then that increases and stimulates the economy. I think the government at the moment are in this sort of dead cat thing, throw a dead cat, come up with some ludicrous, risible, insane nonsense like shipping people to Rwanda at the same time that you're taking refugees from Rwanda.
Some people would welcome that.
It's bonkers, but...
We'll come on to that.
They're throwing these things on the table. And I think that Rishi, at the moment, because don't forget, there's a certain froideur between him and, as it seems to be with every Chancellor and every Prime Minister, certainly in our time, they're mentioning no names. There has been a certain... And I think Rishi could well actually strike out on his own here. But they won't call it a windfall tax. They'll call it a national redistributive or contribution or something. But I think they will. I think you're right. And you heard it here first.
Stephen, what do you reckon? Is there some sort of windfall tax, whatever it's called, on the energy companies to ease people's current pain? Something will have to be done. Do you think they will do something?
Well, I certainly think they should. And there is a precedent. I mean, there are multiple precedents, in truth, for this. But perhaps the precedent that ought to be persuasive to Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak, most persuasive, is that this is exactly what Margaret Thatcher and Geoffrey Howe, also there was some froideur, to pick up Stephen Pound's point, between them. But before the froideur came between Thatcher and Geoffrey Howe, in both 1981, I think it was, and 80 and 81, or 81 and 82, I forget which, 2 consecutive years, the Thatcher government imposed windfall taxes first on the banks and then on the oil companies for North Sea oil. So it's been done multiple times before by Conservative governments and, of course, by the Blair government. And I cannot understand why, at a time when there are quite clearly windfall profits being made by oil companies because of the extraordinary movements in the price of oil, it isn't legitimate to say, quite clearly is legitimate in my mind, to say that some of that additional unplanned windfall return should be available to the taxpayer to support the hard-pressed public services and the other pressures that the Chancellor faces.
Stephen Dorrell, I'm going to stay with you on the story that's dominated, apart from the cost of living, which arguably is way more important, but the story that's dominated politics has also been the breach of lockdown rules. Boris Johnson came under an enormous amount of pressure for that. Now Keir Starmer's under a fair amount of pressure. The argument is that beergate is pretty much the same as Partygate, that both of those leaders took a break while at work to eat and drink with colleagues. Do you agree that it's the same thing, but different standards, different police forces have had different approaches to similar events?
No, I don't agree. I don't think it comes close to being similar. I think the central charge against Boris Johnson in what's called Partygate, which makes it sound trivial, actually, it isn't trivial. It's the culture in number 10 Downing Street. It's the reason why the Sue Gray report has been shelved and why the Prime Minister is anxious to delay its publication is that we're told by leaks, none of us have actually seen this report, but we're told that she is coruscating about the culture in Number 10, the sense to pick up a word that Stephen used earlier of entitlement, of people who think they make rules for other people that don't apply to them. And that's what I think is the central charge, and it's a charge that quite clearly people feel, quite rightly, very concerned about. That the rules that applied to the rest of us were not applied in Number 10, as they should have been.
Many calls, Stephen, for the police to take another look, Durham Police take another look at Keir Starmer's gathering.
Well, Richard Holden, who won North West Durham,
Conservative MP,
he's actually called for it. But look, there's a consistency here with the Durham Police. They didn't prosecute a certain Dominic Cummings, who went to test his eyesight at Castle Bardard, which happens to be in the same police district. But the thing about, and I think Stephen Dorrell's actually right, there is no read across here. Boris Johnson has been charged with 15 different breaches. 15 that we know of so far. We're talking about with the one with Keir up in Durham, in Mary Foy's constituency. They'd had an online canvassing session. Now, I remember Sue Gray, which used to run a pub in Dundalk, and she was a pretty tough customer.
Really?
Yeah. She did. She took a break and went, and she and her husband is a very, very good musician, very popular in the north of Ireland, extremely popular, much better known than she is, by the way. She's known as Sue. Anyway, the point being that Stephen has picked up on the same chatter that I've been picking up on, that this is a fairly coruscating report. To try to divert attention by saying, Keir Starmer chugged a beer. Look, Keir Starmer, for all his faults, is never, ever going to be party to a group of people who bring in a suitcase full of booze from the Co-op in the Strand. That's just not his style. I mean, maybe some people think it might be.
Looks like a gathering. But yes, I take it.
That is a bit different. Look at the picture of everybody in the garden at Downing Street. You've spent enough time in the garden at Downing Street.
I wish.
So, that was a different one. People sitting around, and his Carrie was there. The family were there. It was quite clearly a social gathering. That is not a social gathering. That is a business break where Keir has his mask on, drinks the beer, takes the mask off. I think beer and pizza is pretty small, to pardon the expression, fairly small beer compared to this great long series of parties that they had at Downing, when, after all, the Prime Minister, God love him, was ambushed by a cake.
You are both united on that, although many of our viewers will take a different view, and many people in the country too. But
in Downing Street as well.
I will leave that there. Right, massive day. I will stick with you. Massive day tomorrow. Of course, lots of people, not everybody in England, but lots of people will be going to cast their vote. Now, I'm interested in both your views as an insider. Just how much does, if your party has a bad set of local elections, when the Labour Party was in government, and we don't know what's going to happen, but just tell me what happens in terms of the psyche of that political party.
It's corrosive and it's dangerous. It's the sort of the strange death, really, because if you lose your activists, and when people lose their seats on the council, those are your foot soldiers, those are the key people. And when people are so disillusioned that they actually lose their seats, then you've got a real problem. What's interesting is that I think there's only one borough in the whole of England which has got any uncontested elections. But there's a whole load in Wales and Scotland. There are a lot of people who have been elected as councillors today, even though the elections are tomorrow, because they're uncontested. So it is, and it's only in Wales and Scotland, by the way. It's not in England. But it's extraordinary because it does eat away at the soul. When you have that, it actually hits you at the point, and it is very, very corrosive. But it's also the ultimate temperature testing. I mean, when you look at what's going to happen in Northern Ireland, which could be absolutely, it could be seismic. Quite seriously, it could actually threaten the future of the Union. It could possibly even lead to a united Ireland. It's incredibly important. That will affect every single person on the island of Ireland. So it does affect you. But above all, there's nothing more depressing than being there on election night and hearing all these seats collapsing all over the place in Nottinghamshire.
Yes.
It's happened. And even in the council elections, the council elections are the canary in the coal mine. When the canary dies, then you know that something in your party's died.
Stephen Dorrell, you will have been in government. We've got about a minute or so to talk about this. But you will have been in the cabinet when your party would have had really tough local election results. Tell me about the psyche that you remember, or the things that you remember, how you dust yourself off, or perhaps not dust yourself off and carry on.
Well, I was in the cabinet indeed in the run-up to 1997, so I've experienced this from the other side. And I agree with what Stephen said, that the key point here is that councillors who will have done a good job for their constituents, whichever party they represent, they will have devoted a significant part of their lives, and they will feel that they have been made scapegoats. They've been sacrificial scapegoats because of the unpopularity of a government that they may actually not feel very sympathetic towards. And there are lots and lots of Conservative councillors today who are not Boris Johnson fans, who will be losing their seats tomorrow because of Boris Johnson. And that will be corrosive within the Conservative Party.
I've really enjoyed having you both on. You've been fantastic, straight talking, and you've given us a real insight into how party politics works.
And you're very welcome to the Hanwell Carnival on June the 18th. Come and add a bit of glamour to the occasion.
Thank you so much to the Stephens. Thank you.
Nice to see you again, Stephen.
Thank you. Now,
good to see you too.
Wayne Couzens, the man who murdered Sarah Everard, and the killers of Arthur Libinho Hughes are having their prison sentences reviewed at the Court of Appeal today. Senior judges are hearing challenges or appeals to the prison sentences of 5 killers and considering how whole life orders are imposed. Our London reporter Alice Porter is outside the court now. Alice.
Hello there. Yes, the review started by looking at the sentences which were referred to the Court of Appeal by the Attorney General for being too lenient, and they include Emma Tustin, Thomas Hughes and Jordan Monaghan. And the Attorney General wants Emma Tustin and Jordan Monaghan to receive a whole life order. Now, Jordan Monaghan, he was convicted for killing his partner and 2 children and was sentenced to 3 life sentences with 40 years. Now, Tom Little QC, he says, argued that the murders took place over 7 years, there was an attempted murder of another child, and therefore he should have a whole life order, and that would mean he would never be released from prison. In order to prove they had to prove he had exceptionally high seriousness, such as sadistic conduct, and that was the way in which you'd be able to prove that a whole life order would be eligible. The defence argued that Monaghan was devoid of sadism, savagery or depravity. We then moved on to looking at the case of Emma Tustin and Thomas Hughes. Now, they are the 2 people involved with the case of Arthur Libinho Hughes in Solihull. You may remember the 6-year-old little boy was beaten by Emma Tustin a couple of years ago, and he sadly died. Now, Thomas Hughes, who was the father, he was given a 21-year sentence for manslaughter, but the prosecution want that to increase, arguing that although he was not the person who gave the fatal blow, he was aware of the risk of the very serious harm to his own son. They also said that other children in the home witnessed abuse, and that Thomas Hughes also encouraged abuse and cruelty. The defence then spoke on behalf of Emma Tustin because the Attorney General is hoping that her 29-year prison sentence will be upgraded to a whole life order. The defence said that Emma Tustin's mental state, they talked about the suicide attempts she's had, including of January of this year, and that there was no evidence of continued sadism. We will also be hearing, we're expected to hear later this afternoon from the defence and prosecution in regards to Wayne Couzens and Ian Stewart. Now, both of them have received whole life orders, and they are appealing those whole life orders, and we're expected to hear from both the prosecution and the defence later on today.
Alice, thank you. Thank you. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. Join me again tomorrow at noon. Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan, but first, it's time for your weather.
Hello. Warmer weather is on the way, but today's a fairly cloudy one, quite cool in most places, with some heavy showers, particularly in the east. Meanwhile, many western areas showing signs of brightening up as the afternoon wears on. Here's the big picture. High pressure is trying to move in, but these weather fronts are firmly controlling our weather today, bringing a lot of cloud and shunting showers eastwards. We're going to see one or two heavy ones this afternoon, most likely over northeast England, but also over the Midlands and drifting to East Anglia. The showers over eastern Scotland could be heavy, but they are fading here. Most of Scotland becoming dry this afternoon. Northern Ireland's mostly dry as well, with a fair bit of cloud. Some breaks in that cloud for Wales and southwest England, so a bit of sunshine here. Could see temperatures up to maybe 19 Celsius, but generally still on the cool side with temperatures in the mid-teens. And some quite heavy showers around this evening over southern parts of the Midlands, East Anglia, and one or two across the southeast as well. But those showers do fade through the night, so most places becoming dry overnight. Some patchy rain across the far northwest of Scotland. But for most